You don't expect me to be in this marriage with you in this your condition? I want a divorce.
Pain came first. Not sharp, just heavy, crushing, as if his body had sunk beneath deep water. Giles' eyelids fluttered, struggling against the brightness above him. Slowly the world bled into focus. White ceilings, blinking monitors, the low hum of hospital machines. He was alive. Memory rushed back in broken pieces. The rain, the blinding headlights, the violent impact. Then nothing. He tried to move. His body didn't respond. Before panic could fully settle in, he noticed a small weight against his hand. Someone was holding him. Giles turned his head slightly and froze. A woman sat beside his hospital bed, fast asleep from exhaustion. Her head rested against the mattress, her fingers tightly curled around his hand as though letting go would cause him to disappear. Her hair, usually neat and professional, was a mess of loose strands. Her blouse was wrinkled, her face bare of makeup. Heather Adam. His personal assistant. Confusion flickered through him. Why was she here? The face he had expected to see, the woman who was legally his wife, was nowhere in sight. Heather stirred suddenly as if she sensed his gaze. Her eyes flew open wide with disbelief. For a heartbeat, she only stared at him. Then tears flooded her eyes. "Giles?" she whispered shakily. "Sir, are you awake?" He tried to answer but his throat burned. Only a faint sound escaped. Heather was already pressing the call button, laughing and crying at the same time. "You're awake. Thank God you're awake." Her hands trembled as she brushed his hair back, then quickly withdrew, remembering her place. But she didn't release his hand. Doctors rushed in, voices overlapping, machines growing louder. Heather stepped aside but refused to leave, standing rigid in the corner, whispering silent prayers. When the room finally quieted and the doctors delivered their verdict, Giles felt something far worse than pain. Temporary paralysis. Severe spinal injury. Months of recovery. A strong chance of walking again but no promises. Heather stood beside him, her face pale, eyes glossy with worry. "I'll inform your wife," she said softly. "She's been calling, though she hasn't visited." A cold ache settled in Giles' chest. "Don't tell her everything," he said hoarsely. Heather froze. "Sir?" "Just tell her I've woken up," he repeated. "Nothing else." Concern flickered across her face but she nodded. "As you wish." It took hours before his wife arrived. The door opened and the sound of heels echoed through the room, sharp, deliberate. She entered dressed flawlessly in an elegant designer outfit, her makeup perfect, her expression composed. She looked as though she had stepped into a business meeting, not a hospital room. Her eyes swept over Giles briefly, then landed on Heather. "So," she said coolly. "He's awake." Heather bowed slightly. "Madam, the doctors?" "That will be all," the woman interrupted. "I want to speak with my husband alone." Heather hesitated, glancing at Giles. He gave a faint nod. As she left, Heather looked back once, worry etched deeply into her face. The door closed. Silence fell. Giles' wife approached the bed, her gaze drifting downward, to the lifeless stillness beneath the sheets. "How bad is it?" she asked. Giles studied her carefully. This marriage had always been built on convenience, status, and appearances. Love had never truly lived here. "Very bad," he replied quietly. That was enough. Her lips tightened. "Then we need to be practical. This situation changes things." In that moment, Giles understood. The accident hadn't destroyed his body. It had exposed the truth of his marriage. And outside that door, unaware of what was about to come, Heather Adams stood alone in the hallway, already choosing to stay even as everyone else prepared to leave. 2 weeks later, Giles was discharged from the hospital. The news should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like exile. The morning he left, the sky was overcast, heavy with clouds that mirrored his mood. Nurses moved around him with careful efficiency as he was transferred into a wheelchair. Heather stood nearby, overseeing every detail. His medications, follow-up appointments, physical therapy schedule, her calm voice hiding the exhaustion she refused to acknowledge. "You're going home today," she said gently, offering him a small smile. "Everything is ready." Giles nodded, though something dark and unsettled twisted in his chest. The ride to his estate was quiet. Seoul streets passed by the tinted windows, busy, alive, unchanged, while his life felt as though it had paused somewhere between the crash and the hospital bed. Heather sat across from him in the car, tablet in hand, reviewing instructions from the doctors. "Sir," she said carefully, "there's something you should know." He looked up at her. "Say it." She hesitated for half a second too long. Madam has moved out. The words landed softly, but their weight was crushing. Giles didn't react immediately. He only looked away, his jaw tightening. He had expected it, yet expectation didn't dull the sting. When? He asked. 3 days ago, Heather replied. She sent people. They took her belongings. Personal items. Clothes. Jewelry. Only hers. Nothing of his. The car rolled through the tall iron gates of the Gyeol estate, a place once filled with carefully curated warmth. As the doors opened, reality revealed itself. The house was silent. Too silent. The scent of her perfume was gone. The photos that once lined the hallway, perfect smiles at charity galas and formal dinners, had been removed. Her favorite paintings were missing. The closet in the master bedroom was half empty, the space where she once lived reduced to cold air and dust. She hadn't just left. She had erased herself. Giles was wheeled into the living room, his eyes scanning the space with detached calm. Somewhere deep inside, something broke quietly, without sound, without tears. Heather stood behind him, unsure what to say. I informed the house staff, she said softly. They'll adjust accordingly. And I'll be staying. He turned to her slowly. Staying? As your personal assistant, she clarified quickly, though her cheeks warmed. The doctors insisted you'll need constant supervision. Physical therapy. Assistance. I already cleared my schedule. You didn't have to, he said. Heather met his gaze, steady and sincere. I wanted to. That night, Giles lay awake in the massive bedroom he once shared with his wife. The other side of the bed was untouched, perfectly made, and used. The divorce papers arrived the next morning. Neatly sealed. Efficient. Final. Heather found them first. She stood in the doorway of his study, the envelope trembling slightly in her hand. Sir. You already knew. Bring them in, he said quietly. As he signed his name, stroke by stroke, Giles felt no anger, only clarity. His wife had left when his power disappeared. Heather had stayed when he had nothing to offer. And somewhere between abandonment and devotion, a truth began to take shape, slow, dangerous, and undeniable. Physiotherapy began 3 days after Giles returned home. It was brutal. Every morning, the therapist arrived promptly, cheerful and professional, while Giles faced pain that stripped him of pride piece by piece. His muscles screamed as they were forced to move after weeks of stillness. Sweat soaked through his shirt. His hands clenched into fists as he fought the urge to give up. Again, the therapist encouraged. You're doing well. Giles laughed bitterly. Does it look like it? From the corner of the room, Heather watched quietly. She never interrupted. Never hovered. But she was always there, handing him water, steadying his shoulders when he trembled, whispering encouragement when the pain became too much. You moved your foot today, she said softly after one session, eyes bright. That's progress. He wanted to snap at her. Instead he nodded. At night, when the house fell silent, Heather helped him back into bed, careful and respectful. Sometimes their hands brushed. Sometimes their eyes met for a second too long. Neither spoke of it. Then a few days later the peace shattered. The sound of heels echoed sharply through the marble hallway. Heather looked up from her tablet just as the front door swung open. Giles' wife walked in as if she still owned the place. She was dressed impeccably, tailored suit, diamond earrings catching the light, lips painted a bold red. Her eyes swept over the living room with thinly veiled disdain before landing on Giles in his wheelchair. So, she said coolly, you're home. Heather stepped forward instinctively. Madam, you should have informed us before coming. Us? The woman scoffed, eyes narrowing. You're still here? Giles raised a hand slightly. Heather. It's fine. His wife's gaze hardened as she noticed the subtle changes. The medical equipment, the quiet efficiency of the staff, the way Heather stood close without touching him. I've been waiting, she said, folding her arms. Why haven't you signed the divorce papers? Giles met her stare evenly. I have. Her lips parted in shock. Then why hasn't my lawyer received them? They will, he replied calmly. In due time. That wasn't the answer she wanted. Her composure cracked. Do you have any idea how inconvenient this delay is? She snapped. Or do you enjoy dragging things out now that you have nothing better to do? Heather clenched her fists. Before Giles could respond, his wife continued, voice sharp and businesslike. And let's be clear, she added. I want my share of the properties. The apartment in Gangnam. The villa in Jeju. The investment accounts. Half of everything. Silence fell like a blade. Giles stared at her, disbelief slowly giving way to something colder. You came here, he said quietly, not to ask how I'm recovering, but to ask for money. She didn't deny it. This marriage was an arrangement, she replied coolly. And I refused to walk away with nothing. Heather couldn't stay silent anymore. Madam, she said, voice shaking with restrained anger. He almost died. He's still in recovery. Stay out of this, the woman snapped. You're just an employee. Giles' hand tightened on the armrest. That's enough, he said, his voice suddenly dangerous. You'll get what the law allows. Not a cent more. Her eyes flicked to his legs, then back to his face. Don't forget your condition, she said softly, cruelly. You're not in a position to threaten anyone. That was the moment something inside Giles snapped. Heather saw it, the shift in his eyes, the return of the man who built an empire from nothing. You're dismissed, Giles said coldly. Leave my house. She laughed, incredulous. You think you can still control things from that chair? I don't need to stand, he replied. To ruin you. The silence that followed was thick and deadly. His wife's smile vanished. She turned sharply and walked out, heels striking the floor with fury, already dialing her lawyer. Heather rushed to Giles' side, kneeling slightly so she could meet his eyes. Are you okay? She asked softly. He exhaled slowly. She left when I was weak, he said, and came back when she smelled profit. Heather swallowed. You're not alone anymore. For the first time since the accident, Gyeol looked at her, not as his assistant, not as his caregiver, but as the one person who had truly stayed. And that realization frightened him more than the paralysis ever had. That evening, the house felt heavier than usual. The staff moved quietly as if the walls themselves were listening. Dinner had been served and cleared, untouched. The lights glowed warmly, but no warmth reached Giles' chest. Heather stood a few steps away as a housekeeper adjusted the blanket over his legs. When everything was settled, the staff bowed respectfully and withdrew, their footsteps fading down the long corridor. Only then did the silence return. Giles stared ahead, his reflection faintly visible in the glass wall overlooking the garden. Once, this house had been filled with people. Meetings, laughter meant for appearances, a marriage that looked perfect in photographs. Yet he had never felt so alone. You can go home, Heather, he said quietly without turning to look at her. She hesitated. It's still early. I'll be fine. The words were automatic. A habit formed over years of pretending strength. Heather picked up her bag but didn't move toward the door. I'll sit for a few more minutes, she said gently. The driver will still be there. Giles didn't argue. Minutes passed. Then more. The ticking of the clock grew unbearably loud. I spent my whole life chasing things, he said suddenly, his voice low and rough. Success. Power. Respect. Heather looked up, surprised by the confession. I thought if I gave enough, provided enough, people would stay. His jaw tightened. But when I couldn't stand, she didn't even ask if I was scared. His hands trembled on the armrests of the wheelchair. I woke up alone, he continued, eyes fixed ahead. And I realized something terrifying. I don't think I've ever been loved. Not really. Not by my parents. Not by my wife. The words cost him more than any physiotherapy session ever had. Heather's chest ached. She took a slow step closer, careful, aware of the staff nearby, of boundaries that still mattered. You were valued for what you could give, she said softly. That's not the same as being loved. Something cracked. Giles' breath hitched. His shoulders shook once, then again. He tried to control it, ashamed of the weakness, but the weight he had carried for years finally collapsed inward. I don't know how to live like this, he whispered. Not like this. Tears slipped down his face, silent and unrestrained. Heather didn't rush him. She didn't speak. She simply moved to his side and gently lowered herself onto the edge of the chair beside him, careful not to touch it first. When his head bowed, she placed a steady hand over his clenched fist. You don't have to be strong right now, she said quietly. You've been strong your whole life. His fingers curled around hers without thinking. I stayed, she continued, her voice firm despite the emotion in her eyes. Not because you're powerful. Not because you're wealthy. I stayed because you're human. Giles finally turned to look at her. In her eyes there was no pity, only understanding. He leaned forward, resting his forehead briefly against her shoulder, careful, restrained, yet desperate in his need for comfort. Heather lifted her other hand and rested it lightly against his back, grounding him, holding him together while the world outside his grief continued on. They stayed like that for a long moment. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were red, his expression raw, but clearer. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For seeing me." Heather offered a small, sad smile. "You were never invisible." When the driver arrived, she stood and stepped back, restoring the distance that protected them both. "Get some rest," she said. "Tomorrow will hurt again, but you'll survive it." As she walked away, Gyeol watched her go, something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. For the first time he didn't feel completely alone. And for the first time the thought scared him, because he was beginning to want something he had never planned for. Her heart. Life slowly found a new rhythm. Every morning Heather went to the office as usual. She arrived early, left late, and carried herself with the same quiet competence that had earned her respect long before the accident. Officially, the general manager handled day-to-day operations. Meetings were held, contracts reviewed, decisions made. Unofficially, nothing important moved without Gyeol. By evening, Heather returned to his estate with neatly organized folders tucked under her arm. Financial reports. Strategic proposals. Confidential emails printed and annotated. She never complained. After dinner, while the domestic staff cleared the table and retreated, Heather wheeled a small desk closer to Giles' chair and spread the documents before him. "Here are the quarterly projections," she said one night. "The board wants your approval on the Singapore expansion. The manager supports it, but there's some risk." Giles scanned the pages, eyes sharp despite the fatigue etched into his face. "Delay it," he said after a moment. "Redirect funds to R&D. The market isn't ready yet." Heather made a note instantly. "I'll relay it." Sometimes they worked in silence. Other times they debated, soft but intense, minds meeting effortlessly. It felt natural. Familiar. As though this was how it had always been meant to be. For the first time since the accident, Gyeol felt useful. In the mornings, however, everything changed. Physiotherapy remained unforgiving. The therapist pushed him harder with each session, forcing movement where his body resisted. Sweat soaked his shirt. His jaw clenched as pain radiated through muscles that were slowly waking from their long silence. "Again," the therapist said calmly. "One more time." Gyeol gripped the bars, breath shaking. Heather stood nearby, holding a towel, her heart in her throat as she watched him struggle. "You're doing well," she said when his knees buckled but didn't give out. "You stood longer today." He scoffed weakly. "Barely." "But you stood," she replied firmly. Days turned into weeks. There were small victories. His toes responding, his legs holding weight for seconds longer, the walker replacing the wheelchair during short sessions. Each step felt monumental, each setback devastating. Some nights, after Heather returned from the office and finished reviewing reports with him, she caught him staring at his legs as though willing them to obey. "You'll get there," she said softly once. He looked up at her. "You sound sure." "I am," she replied. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't." The words lingered between them. The staff noticed the change before either of them did. Gyeol laughed more, quietly, rarely but genuinely. Heather smiled more easily, her guarded professionalism softening in his presence. They were still careful. Still respectful. Still standing on opposite sides of a line neither dared to name. Yet every report she brought home, every painful step he took, wove them closer together, thread by thread, into something neither of them was ready to face. The weekend arrived quietly. For the first time in weeks, there were no board meetings waiting, no reports stacked neatly on the table, no urgent calls demanding decisions. The house felt lighter, almost unfamiliar. Giles sat near the window when Heather arrived that morning. "You didn't need to come," he said, glancing at his watch. "It's the weekend. You should rest." Heather smiled as she set her bag down. She was dressed casually today, simple jeans, a soft sweater, her hair pulled back loosely. She looked different, lighter. "I know," she said. "But I wanted to." He frowned slightly. "Wanted to work?" "No," she replied, shaking her head. "I wanted to take you out." He blinked. "Out?" "The doctors said fresh air is good for recovery," she continued calmly. "And you've been staring at these walls for too long. You need nature. Space. A reminder that life exists beyond therapy and paperwork." Giles hesitated. "What about the staff?" "They'll handle things," Heather said gently. "Just for today, let them." The park was quiet when they arrived. Wide paths lined with trees, sunlight filtering softly through the leaves. Birds chirped in the distance, and the scent of grass and earth filled the air. Heather pushed his wheelchair slowly, careful not to rush him. At first, Giles sat stiffly, his hands resting on his lap, eyes scanning the surroundings like a man uncertain of his place in the world. People passed by, joggers, couples, families, but no one stared. No one recognized him as a billionaire or a broken man. He was just there. "This place," he said quietly after a while, "reminds me of when I was younger." Heather looked at him. "Before everything became complicated?" He nodded. "Before I learned that being needed wasn't the same as being loved." She stopped beside a small lake and sat on a nearby bench, facing him. "Today you're not needed," she said softly. "You're just here." They talked, not about work or therapy but about small things. Music he used to like. Places she wanted to visit. Childhood memories neither of them shared often. At one point, Heather helped him stand briefly with his walker. The ground felt solid beneath his feet, the breeze cool against his skin. He laughed, surprised by the sound of it. "I forgot what this feels like," he admitted. By late afternoon, the tension that had lived permanently in his shoulders had eased. His breathing felt deeper. His mind clearer. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in soft gold, Gyeol looked at Heather and realized something startling. He felt alive. "Thank you," he said quietly as they prepared to leave. "For today." Heather smiled, warmth in her eyes. "You needed it." As they headed back, Gyeol leaned his head slightly against the seat, eyes closed, not from exhaustion but contentment. For the first time since the accident, hope didn't feel like something distant. It felt possible. And Heather Adam was at the center of it. As the days go by, he started looking forward to seeing Heather, her warm smiles and calm presence. Note, the divorce has been concluded. As the days went by, something inside Gyeol began to change. It wasn't sudden. It didn't announce itself loudly. It crept in quietly, settling into the spaces he hadn't known were empty. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday morning. The lawyer's voice on the phone was professional, efficient, emotionless. Papers signed. Assets divided. Marriage dissolved. When the call ended, Gyeol felt nothing. No anger. No grief. Just a strange, hollow calm, as if that chapter of his life had already ended long before the ink dried. Heather didn't comment when she noticed the documents on his desk later that evening. She only asked gently, "Do you want me to file these?" "Yes," he replied. "Thank you." That was all. Yet despite everything that had been taken from him, his marriage, his certainty, his sense of control, there was something he found himself waiting for each day. Heather. He noticed it in the mornings when he caught himself checking the time unconsciously. In the quiet lift of his mood when he heard her voice greeting the staff. In the way his chest felt lighter when she smiled at him, warm, unguarded, familiar. Her presence calmed him. During therapy, when pain threatened to overwhelm him, he searched for her in the room without realizing it. When she nodded encouragingly, the pain felt manageable. "You're stronger today," she told him once. He believed her. Not because she said it, but because she believed it. Some evenings, as they reviewed reports together, Gyeol caught himself watching her instead of the pages. The way she listened. The way she considered before speaking. The steady calm she carried, no matter how chaotic the day had been. And when she left at night, the house felt emptier than it ever had with his wife still living there. This realization unsettled him. He had never depended on anyone emotionally before. Need had always been transactional. Useful. Controlled. But this was different. This was wanting to see someone, not for what they provided but for how they made him feel simply by being there. One evening, as Heather gathered her things to leave, Giles spoke without thinking. "You'll be here tomorrow, right?" She looked up, surprised, then smiled softly. "Of course." Relief washed through him before he could stop it. After she left, Giles sat alone, staring at the darkened window. The divorce was over. The past was sealed. And yet, for the first time, he found himself thinking about the future. Not in terms of recovery timelines or business strategies, but in terms of a woman with a calm voice, warm smiles, and a presence that felt like home. He didn't name the feeling. Not yet. But deep down, Gyeol knew, this quiet longing was only the beginning. Gyeol didn't notice it at first. It began as something small, an unease he couldn't place, a restlessness that followed him through the day. He dismissed it as fatigue from therapy, from long hours reviewing reports, from the lingering frustration of a body that still hadn't fully healed. But then Heather didn't come one morning. Her absence should not have mattered. The staff was efficient. The therapist arrived on time. Everything ran exactly as scheduled. Yet something was wrong. Gyeol kept glancing toward the door, half expecting to hear her familiar footsteps, to feel the room shift subtly with her presence. It never happened. "She called earlier," the housekeeper said carefully while adjusting his chair. Miss Heather said she had to handle something at the office. She'll come later in the evening. Later. The word echoed uncomfortably in his mind. Physiotherapy felt harder that day. The exercises were the same, but the encouragement he'd grown accustomed to, the quiet voice reminding him to breathe, the steady gaze that grounded him, was missing. "You're distracted," the therapist noted. Giles didn't respond. By afternoon he had stopped pretending. He missed her. The realization stunned him. He missed her calm presence in the room. The way she listened without interrupting. The subtle warmth she brought into his carefully controlled world. He hadn't felt this way when his wife left. Hadn't noticed her absence the way he noticed Heather's. That frightened him. Evening came. The sky darkened. The house grew still. When Heather finally arrived, she looked apologetic. "I'm sorry I'm late. There was an issue with a supplier." "You don't need to explain," Giles interrupted. She paused, surprised. He stopped, searching for the right words, then gave up. "The day felt longer without you." Silence settled between them. Heather's breath caught slightly. She studied him, unsure how to respond. "I didn't realize," she said softly. He looked away, embarrassed by his honesty. "Neither did I." They didn't speak of it again that night. They reviewed reports. Talked about work. Maintained the careful distance they had both learned to respect. But something had shifted. When Heather left, Giles found himself replaying her smile in his mind. The sound of her voice lingered long after the house had gone quiet. Missing her wasn't weakness. It was truth. And for the first time, Giles understood that healing wasn't only happening in his legs. It was happening in his heart, quietly, dangerously, in ways he could no longer ignore. The house was quiet that evening. Dinner had been cleared by the staff, and the lamps cast soft, golden pools of light across the living room. Giles sat in his wheelchair near the window, the city lights stretching endlessly beyond the glass. Heather was beside him, organizing the reports she had brought from the office. Her presence, calm and steady, filled the room as it always did, but tonight it felt different. Giles cleared his throat. "Heather?" She looked up, eyebrows slightly raised. "Yes." He hesitated, fingers clenching the armrest. The words didn't come easily. "You don't have to stay here so late. You could go home." Heather smiled softly, brushing a stray hair behind her ear. "I know," she said. "But I like being here. It's peaceful, and you need company." He studied her for a long moment. The quiet strength in her eyes, the way she moved, the warmth she brought simply by being near, it was disarming. Something in his chest twisted. He realized he didn't want her to leave tonight. Not for anything. "Stay a little longer," he said finally, his voice low, almost vulnerable. Heather blinked, surprised. "Giles?" "I'm serious," he added, meeting her gaze. I like having you here." Her smile softened. "Of course," she said gently, settling in beside him. They sat in companionable silence for a while, reviewing the reports together, but neither could concentrate fully. The air between them shifted subtly. He noticed the way her hair caught the lamplight, the curve of her lips as she read a line aloud, the way her hand brushed against his as she passed him a pen. And then, before he could think, before he could weigh the consequences or even understand what he was doing, Giles leaned forward. Heather's eyes widened as his lips pressed against hers, sudden, intense, and desperate. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The room, the city lights, the hum of the house, all faded. Heather's hand shot up instinctively, resting on his chest. "Giles?" she whispered, breathless. He pulled back slightly, resting his forehead against hers, heart hammering. I didn't mean to." But she didn't push him away. Her hand stayed, her lips curved into a trembling smile, as if she had been waiting for this moment too. For the first time since the accident, Giles felt a clarity he had never known. He didn't want to be alone. Not anymore. Not in this house, not in this world. Heather's presence had become more than comfort. She had become necessary. And that night, under the soft glow of the living room lamps, Giles realized he couldn't imagine letting her go. The morning air was crisp, sunlight spilling through the tall windows of the Gyeol estate. Giles sat in his wheelchair, staring down at the walker positioned in front of him. Today felt different, he could feel it in his chest, a mix of fear, determination, and something else, anticipation. Heather appeared quietly, holding a small towel and a water bottle. Her calm presence always steadied him. "Good morning," she said softly, smiling. "Ready for therapy?" Giles nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I'm ready." The therapist arrived moments later, clipboard in hand, encouraging words ready. The session began cautiously. He gripped the walker, muscles trembling, sweat forming along his forehead. Every movement was agony and triumph all at once. Again, the therapist urged. Focus on balance. You can do this. Heather stayed by his side, holding his elbow lightly. I've got you, she said. One step at a time. Giles inhaled deeply. He took a trembling step forward. Then another. His legs shook violently, his knees threatening to buckle, but he kept going. Don't stop, Heather whispered, her hand steadying him. You're doing it. Step after step, he moved down the hall. The staff watched from a distance, quietly cheering him on. And then he did it. One solid, confident step. Giles stopped and turned toward Heather, disbelief and triumph in his eyes. His voice broke. He laughed, half from relief, half from joy. I did it. Heather's face lit up. She stepped forward and held his hand. You did. I knew you could. Tears pricked the corners of his eyes. He had spent weeks in pain, frustration, and fear. But this moment, made every struggle worthwhile. He took another step. And another. Each one stronger, more certain. I feel alive again, he whispered, voice barely audible but raw with emotion. Heather squeezed his hand, her own eyes shimmering. You are, she said. And you're not alone anymore. For the first time in weeks, Giles didn't just see progress in his body. He saw it in his life, the people who cared, the love that had quietly grown around him, and the possibility of a future he hadn't dared to imagine. As he took another step, slowly but steadily, Giles realized that recovery wasn't just about walking again. It was about reclaiming life, and maybe, finally, learning to let someone in. Heather's warm smile met his, and in that moment he knew, whatever came next he wouldn't face it alone. After Giles' first successful steps, the atmosphere in the house changed. The staff moved with quiet smiles, giving them space as if sensing something had shifted between their employer and his assistant. The therapy sessions no longer felt like torture. They had become challenges he could conquer, with Heather by his side every step of the way. That evening, after the staff had cleared dinner, Heather brought the reports she had spent the afternoon reviewing. Giles, now standing with the walker in front of him, watched her as she entered. His chest tightened unexpectedly. You're still working on those? He asked, voice soft but teasing. Heather smiled faintly. You know I like to keep busy. And I thought you might want to review them tonight. He shook his head, a small laugh escaping him. You don't have to, you know. You've done enough for me already. She stepped closer, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. I like being here, with you. Giles' heart skipped. The way she said it, quiet, honest and unassuming, made his chest ache in a way he hadn't expected. He took a careful step toward her. Another. Heather noticed, her eyes widening slightly. You're walking again, she said, her voice trembling with pride. You're really doing it. He smiled, but it was different now. Not the smile of accomplishment alone, but of vulnerability. I couldn't have done it without you, he admitted. You stayed when no one else did. Heather's hand hovered, then gently touched his arm. I'm here, she said softly. I always will be. For a moment, the distance between them, the careful professional barrier they had maintained for so long, collapsed. Giles reached out instinctively and took her hand in his. The warmth of her skin, the steady pressure of her grip, felt grounding. I want to lean on someone, he whispered, voice rough. Not just for my body, but for everything. Heather's smile softened. You can, she said. Lean on me. I won't let go. The words hung in the air like a promise. Slowly, deliberately, Giles leaned toward her, resting his forehead against hers. Their breaths mingled. His hands gripped hers tighter, afraid to let go, afraid this moment might vanish. Then, almost instinctively, he pressed his lips to hers. Not with force but with a desperate tenderness, a confession without words. Heather froze, then melted into the kiss, her arms wrapping lightly around his shoulders. Time seemed to stop. The quiet of the house, the soft glow of the lamps, the hum of the city outside, they all disappeared. There was only the warmth between them, the raw honesty of two people who had waded through pain, isolation, and fear to find this connection. When they finally pulled back, Giles rested his forehead against hers again, breathing heavily. I've never felt like this before, he admitted, his voice shaking. Heather's lips curved into a gentle, understanding smile. Neither have I, she whispered. That night, Giles didn't just feel his legs growing stronger. He felt his heart opening, for the first time in years, for someone who had chosen to stay when everyone else had left. And as Heather gathered her things to leave, he found himself not wanting her to go, not yet, not ever. Because he had finally realized that leaning on someone could be the strongest thing a person could do. The city lights had begun to twinkle as the sun dipped low behind the horizon. The air was warm with a gentle breeze, carrying the scent of jasmine from the garden hedges. Giles stood near the doorway, gripping his walking aid tightly. Each step required effort, concentration, and patience. But tonight he felt a quiet determination. Heather appeared at his side, her hand steady on his elbow. She wore comfortable shoes and a soft cardigan, hair loose around her shoulders. "You ready?" she asked softly, a teasing glimmer in her eyes. "I'll manage," he replied, his voice calm but firm. "With you here I can." She smiled and guided him gently, matching her pace to his unsteady steps. "Then let's go. I promise to keep you upright." They moved slowly along the stone paths of the mansion garden, the flowers swaying lightly in the evening breeze. Heather kept one hand on his arm, the other free to point out a particularly vibrant rose or the soft glow of the garden lamps. Giles' steps were careful, deliberate. Each one was an accomplishment, yet he found himself enjoying the rhythm, the quiet intimacy of being guided through the space. "You're stronger than you think," Heather said after a while, her hand brushing lightly against his as she steadied him. "Look at you walking again." He laughed softly, a sound that carried both relief and pride. "I'm still slow," he admitted. "Still need you." "You'll get there," she said with confidence. "And until then I'm right here." The honesty in her voice, the warmth of her presence. It filled something inside him he hadn't realized was empty. He had spent years believing no one could stay through hardship, that people would leave at the first sign of weakness. But Heather had stayed. They reached the fountain at the center of the garden. Water trickled gently, creating a soft melody. Giles paused, resting his hands lightly on the walker. "I never thought I'd enjoy this," he said quietly. "The air, the quiet, being outside." Heather tilted her head, smiling. "It's not just the garden. You're walking. You're moving forward, finally. That's why it feels different." Giles looked at her then, truly looked, and his chest tightened. "I wouldn't have made it this far without you," he admitted. She shook her head gently. "You've done the work. I just guided you." He reached out, lightly taking her hand in his, not for support but as a connection. Heather didn't pull away. They stood together by the fountain, the city humming softly in the distance, the stars beginning to pierce the evening sky. For the first time in months, Giles felt at peace, not because the accident was behind him, but because someone had chosen to stay beside him through it all. And that night, as Heather guided him back to the mansion, Giles realized that each step forward wasn't just about his legs. It was about his heart, and for the first time he felt ready to trust it fully. A few weeks had passed since Giles began taking steady steps again, each day gaining strength and confidence. Physiotherapy continued, but his recovery had progressed enough for him to consider returning to the office. That morning, he sat by the window in his study, sunlight streaming across the papers Heather had neatly organized for him. She entered quietly, carrying her usual stack of reports, and paused when she saw his expression, calm, but with a subtle intensity that made her heart beat faster. "Good morning, sir," she said softly, setting the papers down. Giles looked up at her, a small smile forming. "Heather, I've made a decision." She tilted her head, curious. "About the reports?" "No," his gaze softened, yet there was a quiet determination in his eyes. "About me. About going back to work. I'm ready." Heather's lips curved into a smile, pride lighting her features. "I knew this day would come. Are you sure you're ready, though? Physically, mentally?" He nodded. "I am. It's time. And I want you by my side as always." Her heart fluttered at his words, but she noticed a hesitation in his tone, a vulnerability he rarely allowed anyone to see. "And there's something else," he added after a pause, voice quieter now. "Something I've been holding back for a long time." Heather stepped closer, concern and curiosity mingling in her gaze. "What is it?" He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Heather, these past months, you've been here for me through everything. When no one else stayed, you stayed. You believed in me, cared for me, and I can't stop thinking about you." Her eyes widened slightly, heart skipping. He continued, swallowing hard. "I don't just want you to be my assistant. I want to officially date you. I've tried to deny my feelings, but I can't. Not anymore." Heather's breath caught. She took a moment to process, the weight of his words settling between them like sunlight filling a room. "You want me?" she whispered, voice trembling but full of warmth. Giles stepped closer, his hand brushing lightly against hers. I don't just want you, Heather. I need you. I've realized that you're the one I want to be with, not just for a moment, but for everything that comes next. Tears pricked her eyes, not from sadness, but from the joy and relief of finally hearing what she had hoped for all along. She reached out, her fingers intertwining with his. Yes, she said softly, her voice firm with certainty. I want that too. I've been waiting for you to see what's been right in front of you all along. Giles' lips curved into a smile, one of pure happiness and relief. Without thinking, he leaned down and kissed her, gentle at first, then with the quiet passion that had been growing between them for months. When they finally pulled apart, Giles rested his forehead against hers, breathing heavy but calm. We'll face everything together, he murmured. Heather nodded, her heart full. Together. And in that moment, Giles realized that returning to his business was only part of his journey. The other part, the part that mattered most, was finally stepping into a life with someone who had never left, someone he had come to love completely. The office smelled of polished wood and fresh coffee. The hum of printers and quiet conversations created a rhythm Giles had missed more than he realized. Today he walked through the doors using his walking aid, steady and confident, a small smile tugging at his lips. Heather was right beside him as she always had been, supportive, attentive, yet effortlessly graceful. She carried a tablet in one hand, her other hand ready to steady him if needed. You're back, the manager said, looking both relieved and impressed. We've all been waiting. I'm glad to be back, Giles replied, a sense of triumph in his voice. It feels good to be standing here again. Heather caught his eye and smiled softly. It wasn't just pride, it was warmth, affection, and a quiet joy that made his chest tighten pleasantly. The first few hours were filled with meetings, reports, and briefings. Giles moved steadily, giving directions, reviewing plans, and making decisions with the same sharpness he always had. Heather assisted seamlessly, anticipating his needs, taking notes, and managing minor issues so he could focus on the bigger picture. By midday, Giles paused for a moment, glancing at Heather. I missed this, he said quietly. I missed having someone I trust beside me, through everything. Heather's cheeks warmed. I'm glad to be here, she replied. It's been nice seeing you in your element again. The rest of the afternoon passed smoothly. For the first time in months, Giles felt like himself, not just physically but emotionally. The shadow of the accident, the isolation, the pain, even the betrayal of his ex-wife, it all felt lighter, less suffocating. When the workday ended, he leaned lightly on his walker and followed Heather out to the car. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, and Giles inhaled deeply, savoring the moment. You did well today, Heather said softly, walking beside him. Really well. He smiled at her, a genuine, unguarded expression. I couldn't have done it without you. You've made this easier than I imagined. Heather reached out, brushing her hand against his lightly. We've made it together, she said simply. The drive home was quiet, comfortable. That evening they walked in the mansion garden, the soft glow of lamps casting long shadows over the flowers. Giles took each step with care, Heather steady at his side. The breeze was gentle, the air fragrant, and for the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. I'm happy, he said suddenly, breaking the silence. Not just because I'm back at work, but because of this, us. Heather looked at him, eyes soft, heart full. Me too, she replied. They paused near the fountain, letting the calm of the evening settle around them. Giles leaned lightly on Heather's hand and she rested hers in his. No words were needed. Their happiness was quiet, complete, and unshakable. For the first time in years, Giles felt whole. The business was back on track, his body recovering steadily, and his heart, fully alive with someone who had chosen to stay and love him through it all. Together, they were ready for whatever the future held. The morning sun spilled across the Gyeol estate, painting the marble floors golden. Giles was in the study reviewing contracts, but he barely noticed the words on the page. His thoughts kept drifting to Heather, who was sitting quietly beside him, tablet in hand, eyes focused but calm. Their relationship had settled into something warm and effortless. No longer just employer and assistant, they shared gentle touches, lingering looks, and the quiet comfort of trust. Yet neither had rushed, both aware that the bond they had formed was too precious to force. Sir, your signature is needed here, Heather said softly, holding out a contract. Her fingers brushed his as he took the pen. The contact sent a small, involuntary shiver up his arm. Thank you, he murmured, looking up at her. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the room seemed to shrink until it felt like they were the only two people in the world. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, Heather helped Gyeol into the mansion garden. His legs were stronger now, but he still relied on the walker. She matched her pace with his, gently guiding him across the stone paths. "You've improved so much," she said, her voice soft with admiration. "Look at you, walking like this after everything." Giles smiled, a mixture of pride and affection in his gaze. "Not just me," he said. "You've been here the whole time. I don't know what I would have done without you." Heather's lips curved into a gentle smile. "I told you, I'd always stay." They stopped near the fountain, the water reflecting the colors of the evening sky. Gyeol leaned lightly on his walker, glancing at her. There was something he had wanted to say all day, but words felt heavy, uncertain. Finally he spoke. "Heather, I want you to know something," he said quietly. "I don't just feel happy because I'm back on my feet or back at work. I'm happy because of you. Because of us. Because I love you." Heather's breath caught. She stepped closer, her hand brushing lightly against his. "I love you too, Gyeol," she whispered. "I have for a long time." The world around them seemed to pause. Gyeol let go of the walker for a moment, taking her hands in his. Their foreheads touched, and the garden faded until there was nothing but warmth, trust, and the steady rhythm of two hearts finally aligned. "You've changed everything for me," he said, voice trembling slightly. "I never thought I'd let someone in like this. But with you, I don't want to imagine life without you." Heather smiled, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Then don't imagine it," she whispered. "Because we have each other now. Always." Gyeol pulled her closer, and this time the kiss was slow, deliberate, full of all the longing, gratitude, and love they had built over months. It was a promise of care, of support, of partnership, and the beginning of a life neither of them would face alone. As they pulled back, hands still entwined, Gyeol felt a calm he had never known. The accident, the betrayal, the struggle, they had brought him here to this moment. And with Heather by his side, he was ready for everything the future might hold. The mansion was quiet that afternoon. Giles sat in his study, reviewing expansion plans for the company. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting a warm glow over the room. The front door clicked open sharply. Before he could react, the sound of heels echoed down the marble hallway. And then she appeared. His ex-wife. Dressed impeccably in designer clothes, hair flawless, lips curved in a confident, almost predatory smile. "Gyeol," she said, her voice sweet but sharp. "I heard, you're walking again." Gyeol leaned lightly on his walker, standing tall despite the months of recovery still behind him. He didn't flinch. He didn't feel anger, not the kind that made him lash out. Instead there was calm. Clarity. "I am," he said quietly, measured. "And I'm glad you came to see it for yourself." She stepped closer, her eyes glinting. "I came to see if you really recovered, and to discuss what you owe me." Giles' lips curved into a small, almost amused smile. "What I owe you. That chapter is over." Her confident smile faltered slightly, but she pressed on. "I don't understand why you didn't reach out sooner," she said. "After everything." After everything?" Gyeol interrupted, voice calm but firm. "Let me remind you. You left me when I couldn't stand on my own. You abandoned me when I was broken. You sent divorce papers the moment it was convenient. And now, you're here because you heard I'm walking again?" Her lips pressed into a thin line, eyes narrowing. Gyeol took another step, steadier than before. "I want to thank you." He continued, voice low but unwavering. "Thank you for leaving. Because of that, I survived. Because of that, I found someone who stayed. Someone who believed in me when no one else did. Someone who loves me for me, not for what I can give." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "So," he said finally, calm and resolute, "you can leave now. I'm happy. Truly happy. And I don't need your approval, your possessions, or your presence in my life ever again." Her eyes flickered with something like disbelief. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it. Without another word, she turned sharply and stormed out, her heels clicking furiously against the marble floor. Gyeol exhaled slowly, tension leaving him with her departure. He leaned lightly on the walker, feeling stronger in his body and in his heart than he had in months. For the first time since the accident, he realized the truth. The past had no power over him. His life, his happiness, and his future were his own. And though Heather wasn't there to witness it, he carried the thought of her with him. The reason he had survived, the reason he could finally stand tall and face the world on his own. The evening was calm, the city lights shimmering in the distance as Gyeol arrived at Heather's apartment building. He parked and stepped out, walking toward the entrance with his usual careful pace, still steadying himself on his walking aid. Heather, ever organized and unaware of what he had planned, was waiting by the door. "Gyeol. You're early," she said with a smile, opening it. "I thought I'd pick you up for dinner," he replied, voice soft but warm. "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere special." Heather laughed lightly. "Sounds perfect. Let me grab my bag." They drove through the city streets, the car filled with easy conversation. Heather noticed that Gyeol was unusually quiet, but there was a gentle smile tugging at his lips, one that hinted at a secret delight. When they arrived at the restaurant, it was a small, intimate place tucked away on a quiet street, candlelit tables, soft music playing, and a view of the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. Heather's eyes widened. "Wow. Gyeol, this is beautiful." He smiled, watching her reaction. "I wanted tonight to be about us. No work, no distractions, just dinner." They sat, talked, laughed, and reminisced about small moments from the past months. The first walk in the garden, the long therapy sessions, the quiet nights reviewing reports together. After dessert, Gyeol excused himself for a moment. Heather watched him curiously as he returned, this time holding a small velvet box. Her heart skipped a beat. "Heather," he said, voice low, steady, full of emotion. "These past months, you've been with me through everything. You believed in me when no one else did. You stayed when others left. You've healed more than just my body, you've healed my heart." Heather's eyes filled with tears and she reached for his hand instinctively. "I can't imagine my life without you," he continued. "I don't want to imagine a future where I don't wake up knowing you're by my side." Gyeol opened the box to reveal a delicate, sparkling ring. "Heather Adam, will you marry me?" For a moment the world seemed to stop. Heather's hands flew to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks as she nodded vigorously. "Yes. Yes, Gyeol, of course I will," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a gentle yet passionate embrace. They held each other close, hearts beating fast, the city lights outside forgotten. "I love you," Gyeol murmured into her hair. "I love you too," she replied, pressing her cheek to his. That night, under soft candlelight and the quiet hum of the city, Gyeol and Heather's journey, through pain, healing, and unwavering love, reached a beautiful new beginning. The day was serene. The sun filtered softly through the trees surrounding the estate's garden, where the wedding was held. Only family, a few close friends, and the staff were present, everything small, intimate, and filled with genuine warmth. Heather walked down the aisle in a simple yet elegant white gown, her long hair cascading in soft waves. Giles stood at the altar, completely upright, tall and confident, no longer needing a walking aid. His suit was tailored perfectly, his smile radiant with anticipation and love. When their eyes met, it felt like the world had fallen away. Months of pain, healing, struggle, and unwavering support had led to this moment, and both of them felt it in their hearts. "I can't believe this is real," Heather whispered softly as he took her hands. "It is," Giles said, eyes glimmering with emotion. "All of it. Every step, every moment. I'm here and I'm yours." They exchanged vows quietly, honestly, with no pretense. Promises of love, patience, and unwavering support passed between them. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the garden erupted into quiet applause and warm laughter. After the ceremony, the newlyweds shared a private dinner with the closest people in their lives. Giles couldn't stop looking at Heather, his hands brushing hers across the table, heart full. Later that night, the estate was quiet. Candles flickered softly in the bedroom, casting warm shadows on the walls. Giles stood near the bed, watching Heather as she removed her wedding dress, leaving her in a delicate nightgown. He approached her, no hesitation, his hands resting gently on her waist. "You're more beautiful than I ever imagined," he murmured, his voice husky. Heather smiled, her hands finding his shoulders. "I feel the same. I've waited for this for so long." Their lips met, tentative at first, then with growing passion, hands exploring and holding, finally merging in an embrace that spoke of months of longing, trust, and love. Giles no longer needed support. Every movement was steady, confident, and devoted entirely to her. They whispered each other's names, their bodies moving together naturally, a dance of intimacy and connection, surrendering to love fully. Hours passed, the night filled with quiet laughter, soft moans, and tender kisses. They discovered each other completely, both physically and emotionally, every touch deepening the bond they had built over months of care, healing, and unwavering love. As dawn approached, they lay entwined, breathing softly, hearts still racing but filled with a profound calm. Gyeol held Heather close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I've waited my whole life for this," he whispered. Heather smiled, resting her head against his chest. "So have I, and now we have forever." For the first time since the accident, Gyeol felt truly whole, healthy, loved, and complete. With Heather by his side, every step forward was theirs to take together. Thank you for watching. We look forward to your comments. See you in the next story.